The day his son died, they called it an accident. Walter called it a lie with a lawyer's signature. The sound of that verdict had followed him through 3 decades of silence, through birthdays that never came, through empty chairs at dinner, through the creak of an old workshop that used to echo with laughter. He had buried his voice the day the court freed Martin Hale, the man who owned the company, the man who owned the truth. Hale had shaken hands with the judge while Walter stood outside in the rain, clutching a soaked photograph of his boy. That moment had turned time into punishment. He never spoke Hale's name again, until tonight. The television crackled to life as Walter wiped sawdust from his palms. He wasn't paying attention at first, just background noise, the same cheap headlines. Then a name broke through the static. Real estate tycoon Martin Hale survives mansion fire. The reporter said, voice smooth detached. Walter froze. The brush in his hand stopped mid-stroke, dripping varnish onto the concrete floor. The image on the screen flickered. Hale standing near his burn estate, unharmed, smiling faintly for the cameras. The reporter continued. Authorities believe faulty wiring may have caused the blaze. Walter's heart pounded once hard, then went quiet. Faulty wiring. The same words they used for Ben's death. He turned off the TV, but the silence screamed louder than any broadcast. The world had just reopened a wound that never healed. He walked across the dim workshop and lifted the old toolbox from beneath the bench. The brass handle felt colder than he remembered. When he opened the lid, the smell of oil and time filled the air. Tools lay inside like relics. The chisel Ben had used, the hammer engraved with his initials, and the photo taped under the lid. A young man in a hard hat, grinning at the camera. Proud of you, Dad, it said in blue ink. Walter ran his thumb across the letters until the paper smudged. They burned your truth once, he whispered. Let's see if they can survive the ashes this time. The next morning, the world moved as if nothing had changed. But inside Walter, something had. He sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the morning paper. The headline, Hale vows to rebuild his legacy. Beneath it was a smiling photo of the same man who'd ruined his life. The caption read, Every foundation deserves a second chance. Walter almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the paper. He stared out the window at the slow sunrise crawling over the roofs of quiet houses. He'd built most of them. Honest work, straight lines, clean wood. He had built homes for other men's sons, while his own lay beneath a cross of cheap pine. At the community center, people greeted him with nods and easy smiles. The old carpenter, kind eyes, steady hands. No one saw the storm behind his calm face. He repaired tables, fixed chairs, helped kids sand small blocks of wood into birdhouses. But when one of the volunteers switched on the news in the background, Walter heard that name again. Martin Hale is hiring local craftsmen to assist with his mansion rebuild, the reporter said. The room filled with small talk, but Walter's focus tunneled. He stood slowly, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked out before anyone noticed. That night, he didn't sleep. The clock ticked louder than usual, every second tapping against his ribs. On the table beside him, the newspaper lay open beside Ben's photo. Between them, Walter's old sketchbook, untouched since the accident. He turned to a blank page and began to draw. The lines came back to him like muscle memory. The mansion's layout unfolded. Its stairs, its beams, its wiring. He remembered every flaw, every shortcut Hale ordered, every lie hidden beneath luxury. As graphite shaped the paper, an idea formed, not revenge through rage, but through precision, the kind only a carpenter understands. At dawn, Walter made a call. His voice was steady, almost attached. I'm a retired carpenter, he told the woman who answered. Worked on Hale's projects years ago. Heard he's rebuilding. The woman sounded surprised. Mr. Hale respects loyalty. Could you come by tomorrow morning? He hung up without hesitation. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at his reflection in the dark window, a man older, smaller, but not defeated. The lines on his face looked carved, not worn. The eyes, tired yet sharp, stared back like blueprints redrawn. The following morning, Fog wrapped the world in pale silence. Walter walked the old road toward the hill where the mansion stood, its remains rising like a skeleton from the mist. Reporters hovered near the gates, snapping photos. Workers shouted in the distance. And at the center of it all stood Martin Hale, wearing a spotless suit and a white hard hat, shaking hands like nothing in the world could touch him. When he noticed Walter, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. Faint, momentary, gone. "Walter Crane," he said, his voice bright and public. "I didn't know you were still around." Walter forced a small nod. "Still build things that don't fall," he said quietly. Hale laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Then you're perfect for this job. Let's rebuild something beautiful. Old friend." Old friend. The word sat like poison in Walter's ears. He followed Hale through the blackened remains of the estate, taking in every detail. The scorched beams, the melted wiring, the ash still clinging to the marble floor. Hale spoke about timelines, budgets, and innovation. Walter listened, but his mind was elsewhere. Each burned wall whispered like ghosts. He saw Ben's face in shadows, heard the echo of collapsing wood, the scream that ended too soon. He touched one of the cracked columns, tracing it with his thumb. "Weak foundation," he murmured. Hale turned, smiling. "That's why I called you. We'll make it stronger this time." Walter nodded, his voice a whisper beneath the noise. Yes, strong enough to hold the truth this time. By the time he returned home, the fog had lifted, but his decision had settled like stone. He set his toolbox on the table and opened it again, laying each tool out carefully. The chisel, the hammer, the measuring tape, and finally, Ben's photograph. He placed the picture upright beside the ticking clock and spoke softly, as if the boy could still hear him. "Tomorrow I start building again. But not for him, for you." The watch on his wrist ticked in rhythm with his heartbeat. He closed his eyes and breathed in the faint scent of varnish and dust, the scent of his old life returning. Then, with steady hands, he folded the blueprint, placed it inside the box, and shut the lid. Outside, the first light of morning broke across the horizon, spilling gold through the workshop window. Walter stood there in the quiet, the ticking watch echoing like a metronome for time itself. The world thought the fire had ended the story. They were wrong. It had only just lit the fuse. The first time Walter stepped back into Hale's mansion, he felt the air change. It wasn't the smell of fresh timber or the hiss of welding. It was the quiet weight of unfinished business pressing against his ribs. The walls were bare, the ashes cleaned, but the ghosts remained. He looked at the hollow space where the staircase once stood, the same structure Ben had fallen through 3 decades ago. His fingers tightened on the handle of his toolbox. "You said it was wiring," he whispered under his breath. "Let's see if you still believe that." Martin Hale's voice broke through the echo. "Crane, you're early, I like that." Walter turned slowly, masking the venom in his stare. Hale wore his wealth like armor, polished shoes, designer gloves, a white hard hat that hadn't seen a day of dirt. "Old habits," Walter said. "I don't sleep much." Hale clapped him on the back. "Too friendly, too false." "Perfect. You'll oversee the interior framework. Keep it solid. I can't afford another collapse." Walter's jaw flexed. He met Hale's eyes for just a moment, letting silence speak the rest. "Neither can I." That night, Walter stayed long after crew left. The sight lights buzzed above him, turning dust into tiny floating stars. He studied the blueprints laid out across the workbench. Every beam, every joint, every shortcut Hale's architect had approved. They looked perfect, but Walter saw through perfection. He always had. He circled 3 structural points in red pencil, the same locations where Ben had raised safety concerns all those years ago, warnings Hale had ignored to save money. Walter's hand didn't shake this time. He folded the blueprints neatly, tucked them into his bag, and replaced them with identical copies he'd drawn himself. His version carried small but crucial adjustments. Hidden channels for wiring, narrow gaps behind wall panels, hollow spaces just large enough to conceal what he needed to hide later. Each day after that, he worked quietly, methodically, like a surgeon repairing something the world didn't know was broken. He rebuilt walls, replaced supports, and fixed circuits with careful precision. The crew joked that he was slow, old-fashioned, obsessed with details. They didn't see the small black cameras wired into the beams, the voice recorders hidden behind ventilation panels, or the microchips buried near electrical lines. Walter called it insurance. The mansion would watch itself burn with the truth this time. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of construction masked the rhythm of revenge. Hale visited often, to pose for cameras, to give speeches about resilience, to shake hands with politicians who called him a self-made inspiration. Walter kept his head down, his expression unreadable. But every nail he hammered was a heartbeat of restraint. Every screw tightened was a promise whispered to the dead. During breaks, he watched Hale charm investors, the same way he once charmed inspectors into silence. Some wounds never healed. They just changed their shape. One evening, Walter found himself alone in the unfinished master study. The room overlooked the valley, a perfect view for a man who liked to see his kingdom from above. A silver-framed photograph rested on a half-built shelf, freshly unpacked. It showed Hale shaking hands with the same judge who had ruled the case all those years ago. Walter stared at it until his throat went dry. He picked up the frame, turned it over, and pulled a small screwdriver from his pocket. He unscrewed the back, slipped the photograph out, and replaced it with one of his own, Ben, smiling in sunlight, unaware of the future. When he set it back, he almost smiled. Revenge didn't have to shout. Sometimes it whispered through details. That night, a soft rain tapped against the unfinished roof. Walter sat alone in the workshop trailer, writing in his old leather notebook. The pages were filled with sketches, calculations, and dates, a silent record of everything Hale had done, every corner cut, every life endangered. In the middle of the page, he wrote 4 words in neat, slow handwriting. Truth built into wood. He tore the page out and slipped it into his pocket. The ticking of his wristwatch filled the silence. It had belonged to Ben. Each tick was a reminder that time could wound or heal, depending on the hand that turned it. A week later, Hale invited him into his office to discuss progress. The office sat at the edge of a construction site, filled with fake warmth, whiskey glasses, cigars, framed awards that meant nothing. Hale poured himself a drink, then one for Walter. "You know, Crane," he said, leaning back, "I've always admired you. You stayed quiet after that tragedy. Most men would have tried to ruin me with lies." Walter looked at the amber liquid swirling in his glass. "You already did that yourself," he said. Hale laughed, unbothered. "You're bitter, old friend. You can't live your life chained to one mistake." Walter set the glass down untouched. "A mistake is tripping over your own foot. What you did was profit from a coffin." Hale's smile flickered. "Careful," he said softly. "Words can still ruin a man." Walter met his eyes. "Then you should have thought of that 30 years ago." He walked out, leaving Hale alone with his reflection and the faint ticking of his own expensive clock. From that night on, Walter's preparation turned deliberate. He didn't just build. He designed the story of Hale's undoing. He connected the hidden cameras to a private transmitter, rigged to activate when power surged beyond capacity. The same flaw Hale's greed insisted on keeping. He rewired the mansion's main breaker to feed into his own small generator hidden underground. It was poetry, really. Hale's empire would burn itself with its own deceit. But Walter wasn't thinking about fire anymore. He was thinking about proof, justice, not ashes. Late one evening, as the last workers packed up, Walter stayed behind to finish the main hallway floor. Each plank clicked into place with precision. When he reached the final board, he lifted it again and placed a small metal box beneath. Inside, a drive containing decades of silence. Blueprints, forged permits, bribe ledgers, voice recordings, all traced back to Hale. He sealed it tight and whispered, "For when they come looking." He straightened up slowly, back aching, sweat glistening on his forehead. The room glowed golden under the floodlights. It almost looked peaceful, like redemption waiting to happen. He took one last look at the mansion's growing frame and thought of Ben. The boy's laughter still echoed somewhere between the beams. "You'll see it, son," he murmured. "You'll see him fall the right way this time." Outside, the rain stopped. The night grew still, heavy with the quiet weight of inevitability. Walter locked the gate behind him and started down the road, his toolbox swinging at his side. The mansion loomed behind him, a monument of secrets dressed as wealth. And as he walked into the mist, the ticking of his watch kept time with his footsteps, steady, patient, like a man measuring distance between sin and justice. By the time the lights of the mansion flickered out behind him, the trap was already built. It just didn't know it yet. He hadn't meant to record murder. He'd only meant to catch a liar. But when Walter replayed the footage that night, his hand went still halfway to the pause button. Martin Hale's voice came through the static, low, amused, drunk on his own words. "You think I care about those workers? They were numbers. Collateral. That boy, what was his name? Ben Crane? He signed his own death when he challenged me. The judge did what I paid him to do." The audio hissed softly after that, filling the space like poison. Walter sat in the dark trailer, the glow of the small monitor reflecting in his tired eyes. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the sound of 30 years breaking apart all at once. His chest tightened until he could hardly breathe. He had imagined this confession for decades, rehearsed what it might sound like, but hearing it made the air heavy, unreal. He reached out, pressed rewind, and listened again, every word slicing open old scars. Collateral. Hale's laughter echoed, the kind that came from men who thought justice was just another business expense. Walter's fingers curled against the table. His son's name had never sounded so alive, or so betrayed. The next morning, Hale arrived at the mansion with 2 investors and a bottle of champagne. Cameras followed, capturing the celebration of rebirth. Walter stood quietly in the background, hammer in hand, watching Hale pose beside the grand staircase. The man spoke about legacy, about second chances. Every lie landed like a nail in the coffin he'd built himself. The champagne cork popped, applause followed, and Hale raised his glass. "To rebuilding what time tried to take," he said. Walter's gaze flicked to the hidden camera above the chandelier, the one that had captured the truth time couldn't hide anymore. He didn't smile, didn't move. He just whispered under his breath, "To finally taking it back." That evening, after everyone left, Walter walked through the half-finished mansion in silence. The air smelled of fresh paint and dust, but beneath it lingered something darker, memory. He entered the study, where the photograph he'd swapped weeks earlier still sat on the shelf. Ben's face looked back at him, young and fearless, beside a man who never remembered his name. Walter brushed the dust off the frame and whispered. He confessed, "Ben, you can rest soon." The old floorboards creaked under his boots as he crossed the desk. He opened the drawer and removed a flash drive he'd hidden beneath a false panel. On it lived every secret Hale had ever spoken aloud since the rebuild began. Bribes, forged safety documents, even orders to use cheaper materials again. Walter turned the small device in his hand, its plastic surface glinting like a weapon disguised as mercy. But justice had rules, even for betrayed. Walter didn't want headlines or vengeance soaked in blood. He wanted truth that couldn't be buried again. He spent the next 3 nights quietly collecting every recording, every photograph, every blueprint copy. He labeled them with careful precision, each file named for a sin. Murder, fraud, collapse. When the last file uploaded, the folder name blinked on the screen, Legacy. He smiled faintly at the irony. The world would finally see Hale's real legacy, stripped of polish. Still, a part of him hesitated. Exposure was power, but it could also burn everyone standing too close. He thought of the workers on site, men just earning a living, of the young reporter who'd first brought him the job offer, of his granddaughter, Lily, who still believed her grandfather was just a tired carpenter trying to make ends meet. He couldn't let their names be dragged through Hale's fire. So he planned something quieter, cleaner. Something only truth could survive. The next morning, Hale called him into the office again. "Walter," he said, lighting a cigar, "we're almost done. I've got city inspectors coming Friday. I want this place spotless, especially the wiring." The smoke drifted between them, thick and lazy. Walter met his eyes. "You always did care about the surface, Martin." Hale smirked. "That's what people pay for." Walter studied the flame at the cigar's tip, then said, "Funny thing about surfaces. They crack easy when the foundation's rotten. Hale frowned slightly, sensing the edge in his tone. You're a good man, Crane. Don't go philosophical on me now. Finish the job, get your check, and enjoy retirement. Walter gave a slow nod. I'm almost finished. Just one thing left to build. He left before Hale could ask what. That night, Walter placed the final tool in his box, the same chisel Ben had once used. Then he slid the finished flash drive into a brown envelope marked with one word, Truth. He addressed it to the state attorney's office, sealed it with glue, and tucked it into his jacket. Tomorrow, he'd hand it over. Tomorrow, he'd let time speak for him. He turned off the lamp, but his reflection lingered in the dark window. A tired man, yes, but not broken. He thought of Ben again, the boy who built things to last. You were right about strength, son, he whispered. It's not what you lift. It's what you carry for years without dropping. Just before dawn, he returned to the site to finish the last beam installation. The mansion stood quiet, beautiful, deceptive. Hale's kingdom rebuilt on the same lies that once buried a good man's name. Walter climbed the scaffolding slowly, each step creaking under his weight. When he reached the top, he paused and looked out at the horizon. The first sunlight painted the valley gold, the same color as Ben's hair in old photos. Walter smiled, small but real. Almost there, he said. Below him, the mansion hummed with quiet electricity. He tested the wiring one final time, flipping the breaker switch that linked every hidden camera together. Lights blinked to life, then dimmed again. The system was ready. One command, and the recordings would upload to every major news outlet he'd queued overnight. Truth, timed and waiting. Walter tightened the last bolt, wiped sweat from his forehead, and descended. As he reached the main floor, Hale entered, holding a coffee and a grin. You're here early again. Can't stay away from your masterpiece, can you? Walter looked around the room, the beams, the panels, the secret sealed inside them, and said, No. Some things you have to finish with your own hands. Hale raised an eyebrow. You sound sentimental, old man. Walter smiled faintly. Not sentimental. Just certain. Hale laughed, turning away toward the hall. Walter's hand brushed against the breaker's switch again, feeling the faint vibration of current running through it. His watch ticked louder now, faster, matching his pulse. He glanced at the ceiling where the cameras hid, at the floor beneath which his evidence slept, and at the man who once stole everything standing right before him, oblivious. Careful walking in the dark, Martin, Walter said quietly. Hale turned, confused. What? Walter's eyes met his, steady, unblinking. Sometimes the lights show more than you expect. Hale smirked, not understanding. You old poets kill me. He walked off, the sound of his laughter echoing through the hall. Walter watched him disappear around the corner, then turned back toward the breaker, the envelope of truth heavy in his pocket. The mansion around him seemed to breathe, alive with waiting, and as the ticking of his watch slowed back into rhythm, Walter whispered in the empty room, Let there be light. The invitation came wrapped in gold foil, as if gilt could shine. Grand reopening of the Hale estate, it read. Walter held it over the sink for a long moment, letting the edges curl in his trembling hands. The words blurred as water dripped from the faucet, slow and steady like time mocking him. He'd built that house with silence, filled his walls with truth, and now the man who killed his son wanted applause for it. He laid the invitation flat, his jaw tightening until it hurt. The mansion was complete. The cameras were live. And the world was about to remember what Martin Hale had buried. The evening arrived under a velvet sky, clean and perfect, as if even the weather had bowed to Hale's vanity. Cars lined the drive in neat rows, their headlights slicing through the dark like anticipation. Walter parked at the edge of the property, his old truck coated in dust among a parade of luxury. The watch on his wrist ticked softly. Ben's watch, steady, patient, ready. He adjusted his jacket, feeling the flash drive in the inner pocket where it pressed against his heart. Inside it waited every confession, every bribe, every word Hale thought no one would ever hear. Walter took one breath of the cool night air and started walking. Inside, the mansion gleamed. Marble floors reflected golden chandeliers. Champagne glasses chimed. Cameras flashed. Hale stood near the staircase in a tailored black suit, shaking hands, smiling for photographs. The very steps beneath his feet were the same ones that had once collapsed under Ben's weight, rebuilt plank by plank under Walter's quiet supervision. Walter Crane. Hale called out, spotting him across the room. "You actually came." Walter nodded once, his face calm. "I finish what I build." Hale laughed, clapping him on the back. "You're a legend tonight, old man. Without you, none of this would stand." Walter's eyes flicked toward the ceiling, where hidden cameras watched everything. "You're right," he said quietly. "It wouldn't." As speeches began, Walter moved the crowd unseen, every step deliberate. He glanced at the servers, the journalists, the politicians, all drawn by Hale's promise of rebirth. The air smelled of perfume and lies. Hale's voice rose over the chatter. "This house is a symbol of second chances, of turning tragedy into triumph." Applause followed. Walter reached the power console hidden behind a velvet curtain near the main hall. The breaker's switch gleamed under the faint light. He hesitated for a moment, his reflection visible in the polished metal. "For you, Ben," he whispered, and flipped it on. Screens lit up across the room. The applause faltered. The music cut out. The chandeliers flickered once, then steadied as the televisions mounted for the event changed from live feeds of the guests to video footage. Grainy at first, then sharp. Martin Hale's face filled every screen. His voice came through the speakers, calm and arrogant. "You think I care about those workers? They were numbers. Collateral. That boy, Ben Crane, he signed his own death." Gasps rippled through the hall. People turned confused, horrified. Hale froze mid-sentence on stage, his smile collapsing. "Turn that off," he shouted, but the sound system obeyed only Walter. Another clip followed. Hale bragging about bribing the judge, mocking the trial, laughing about the fire insurance that made him richer. The truth played out like a sermon from hell. Walter stepped into the open, his shadow stretching across the marble floor. Hale saw him and shouted, "You did this." Walter didn't deny it. "I built your house," he said softly, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. "And I built your confession inside it." The crowd parted between them like water. Reporters raised their cameras. Flashbulbs erupted. Hale stumbled backward, face pale, words lost. "You think this makes you righteous?" he spat. "You'll burn with me." Walter took a slow breath. "Maybe, but I'll burn clean." Suddenly, sparks hissed from the ceiling as one of the overheated circuits overloaded. The lights flickered violently. Someone screamed. A chandelier crashed down, shattering like thunder. Panic surged through the guests as flames licked across drapes and walls. Smoke coiled up in gray ribbons, devouring Hale's empire faster than he could comprehend. Walter didn't move. He watched the fire crawl along the beams he had reinforced, the same beams that now carried the weight of justice. Hale staggered toward him, coughing, eyes wild. "You planned this," he shouted. Walter's face was calm, almost sad. "No, you did. I just finished it." He turned toward the exit as alarms wailed and people rushed past, clutching their jewels and their guilt. Hale tried to follow but slipped, crashing against the staircase. The irony wasn't lost on Walter. Some collapses were built by memory, not by hands. Flames illuminated the grand hall in a harsh, beautiful glow. For a second, it looked like Ben's smile reflected in the firelight. Walter stepped outside into the night air, coughing, sweat streaking his face. Behind him, the mansion roared, every scream and crack merging into a single sound, the past collapsing in real time. Fire trucks blared in the distance, sirens growing louder, but Walter didn't turn back. He walked to the edge of the driveway, watching the glow rise against the stars. A reporter ran up, microphone shaking. "Sir, did you see what happened?" Walter looked at the inferno for a long moment, then said quietly, "I saw the truth finally breathe." The reporter blinked, unsure how to respond. Walter kept walking, each step measured, steady, final. At the edge of the property, he stopped and pulled a watch from his wrist. The glass face reflected the fire like a dying sun. He opened the clasp and set it gently on the stone wall beside the gate. "You can rest now," he whispered. The ticking faded into the night, swallowed by distant sirens. He slid his hands into his coat pockets and kept walking, the glow behind him shrinking with each step until it was nothing but smoke on the horizon. By dawn, the mansion was ash. Police tape flapped in the cold breeze. Reporters crowded the gates, shouting questions about arson, corruption, and cover-ups. Walter stood across the road, unseen among the onlookers. He watched as investigators carried out blackened evidence bags, one of which contained the small metal box he had buried beneath the floor, the drive inside untouched by flame. Truth, preserved by the same precision that once built Hale's fortune. Walter smiled faintly, his eyes wet. "Strong enough to hold the truth this time," he murmured. He turned away, walking down the quiet road as sunlight broke through the haze. The world behind him would talk of the fire, the scandal, the downfall of a man named Hale. But only Walter knew what it truly meant. Justice hadn't come from the flames. It had come from patience, the kind only time teaches. He reached the crest of the hill, looked back one last time, and whispered he couldn't buy the silence this time. Then he faced forward, toward the soft gold of morning. The past was burning behind him, but his steps were steady, and the watch on the wall kept ticking in the light, marking the hour when truth finally caught up. Make sure to like this channel, subscribe, and enjoy the videos.